This is an art collage novel video. I made this series so you guys can experience the story faster. The video will focus on the character's psychology, the images are for illustration purposes only. Lord Cui, Ding Ling said coldly, we don't need an explanation from her. Please give her an explanation. Hold on. Su Donha felt the hostility of those auras and the undisguised killing intent in the eyes of those experts. She had no choice but to yield and said in a sullen voice, I'll pay the 10 billion from Tianyuan Trading Company. The others are too high. I'll pay 1 billion for each of them. No more. Cui Bo nodded. All right, let's do this. This will not happen again. Otherwise, I will not spare you. Elder D, you are in charge of the compensation. He didn't ask Ding Ling anymore. This compensation was acceptable for them, but if they continued to struggle, they might not have a good ending. As the host, he had to take the overall situation into consideration. Furthermore, it was definitely not a small amount to compensate 1 billion for each of those unknown minions. He had put Elder D in charge of the compensation because he was afraid that those minions would not dare to ask for compensation from Empyrean 1 Pavilion, so he had done it on his behalf. The relatives and friends of those martial artists were sad and angry, but they also felt a little relieved. However, they also lamented the different lives of martial artists. A slight injury of others was worth 10 billion, but the death of their side was only 1 billion. However, this amount had already exceeded their expectations, so they didn't dare to say anything more. They cast a grateful look at Tianyuan Trading Company. After this episode, the entire central square became silent. Su Donha also became a lot more dispirited. She had a straight face and didn't want to say anything. The rest of the people also turned their eyes to the water curtain. It was only then that they were surprised to find that Xiao Jingming had already started to rush into the 7th level. Most of the people had bet on him, so there were many excited people who clenched their fists. At this time, many people had begun to be eliminated one after another. They had all held on until the last moment and let the spell tower eliminate them on its own. For these weak contestants, every minute they lasted was a great benefit. At this moment, the eliminated people were all full of smiles. Their purpose was to cultivate, but there were also some who felt that things were not going well and appeared depressed. At this time, Yunxiao was also slowly leaving the 5th floor and rising to the 6th. On the 5th floor was a complete refining process, and the object refined was a mirror with a great illusion effect. During the refining process, it constantly produced illusory counterattacks, which was very difficult for 5th-tier alchemists. Yunxiao also stayed for a long time, just to observe the design and effect of the 5th floor. After stepping into the 6th floor, the entire space was white. There was a stone tablet in front of him with instructions written on it, earth, water, fire, and wind were created from nothing. Comprehending the elements and stepping into the 7th level. Yunxiao's pupils constricted. Earth, water, fire, and wind were the 4 elements that could separate the heaven from the earth, and they were essential for the world that had evolved from the chaotic void. Most of them existed in the descriptions of ancient martial artists and alchemists, because there were no longer any martial artists who could separate the heaven from the earth. To comprehend these 4 elemental powers from the heavens and earth, Yunxiao sat down quietly and completely released his divine sense. The power of his soul slowly overflowed from his body as he began to sense the elements that existed in this space. Suddenly, a circular formation disk appeared in his spiritual altar and sea of consciousness. It was round on the outside and square on the inside. It was neatly divided into 4 pieces with the symbols of the 4 major elements marked on them. The formation disk appeared in his sea of consciousness and slowly circulated. The evil dragon sighed. This magic tower is indeed an ancient thing. The merchant union is indeed rich and generous. I wonder where they got such a treasure. These 9 floors should be the 9 levels of sorcery that ancient sorcerers divided into. It seems to be much stricter than now. Indeed. The ancient sorcerers' understanding of sorcery should be higher than the current sea of soul formation. Yes, Yunxiao replied solemnly. Then, he sat down cross-legged and began to sense the elements in the void. The first thing he came into contact with was the feeling of some fiery red elements jumping around happily around him. Gradually, more and more of them appeared, and he felt unspeakably comfortable. Although he was a 9th-tier alchemist, and his control of fire had reached the level of perfection, he had never calmed himself down, relaxed his body and mind, and entered the world of fire elements. At this moment, he felt as if he was a fire element, happily playing around with his friends. That feeling made him very pleased. He was a fire elemental spirit, and he kept discovering that his previous understanding of the fire element was still too shallow. Only after he turned into flames did he realize that this was the fire element. In his spiritual altar and sea of consciousness, the fire world on the 4-element disk array suddenly lit up, indicating that he had passed. The fire elements in the surroundings began to dissipate slowly, trying to leave. Yunxiao suddenly felt a sense of reluctance, as if his friends and family were about to leave. He kept shouting and shouting, asking everyone to stay. However, his friends still left one by one. "No, don't go." Extreme unwillingness welled up in Yunxiao's heart as he roared, "Don't leave, no one is allowed to leave." As he shouted, the fire elements that were about to dissipate suddenly stopped. For some reason, they did not disappear into the darkness, as if they had sensed Yunxiao's call and finally stayed. Not only that, but his fire elemental companions also began to call for their companions, constantly shouting with him and summoning their other companions. Gradually, the retreating fire elements returned and surrounded Yunxiao. He could even feel that his friends were as happy as he was. After an unknown period of time, he finally felt that he was tired and needed to rest. The fire elements were also tired. Everyone shouted, "Goodbye," and slowly left, retreating into the darkness. Yunxiao's divine sense returned to his body, and his eyes were filled with extreme shock and disbelief. He felt that his affinity with the fire element had reached an unprecedented level. Even in the empty void, he could clearly feel that the hidden fire element was the composition of the world. Just as he was feeling extremely shocked, another type of elemental power began to slowly appear in the surroundings. It was a light yellow color, giving off a very thick and familiar feeling. It was the second element, earth. Outside the tower, everyone was nervously looking at each person's condition. There were only 15 people left. On the 7th floor, only Xiao Jingming, the man from the Thunderwind Chamber of Commerce, Cui Yuan, and the others were still trapped in the 6th floor, unable to break through. Only Yunxiao and another man were left on the 5th floor. At this moment, the other man on the 5th floor began to glow faintly. He opened his eyes, which were filled with a contradictory look of surprise and a bitter smile. He was slowly transported out. His 2 hours of stay was up. "The situation doesn't look good," Qian Wudi suddenly said. "Li Yunxiao has been on the 5th level for almost 2 hours. If he doesn't advance, I'm afraid he'll be eliminated." "Yes, I'm afraid it won't be long." He advanced to the 5th place after the time taken to brew a cup of tea to the person who was just eliminated. "It seems that young master has placed the wrong bet this time," said Zhang Chong indifferently. With his speed, it was clear that the 5th level's test was too difficult for him. Even if he can, the 6th floor will be his final destination. "I'm going to be embarrassed soon." After being punished, Su Donha had been a little dispirited. It was not until she saw that Yunxiao was about to be eliminated that she suddenly regained her spirit and laughed happily. "Old hag, you're courting death again," young Emperor Halian said angrily. At this moment, he could not help but feel a little nervous. Although he could not believe that Yunxiao would be defeated, the passing of time was still making him anxious. Under Su Donha's gloating, he was so angry that he scolded back. "Humph. I don't want to waste my breath on you. That Li Yunxiao will be defeated in half a cup of tea's time at most. 150 billion, Tianyuan Trading Company is really generous." Su Donha suddenly felt that this was the happiest moment in the past few days. All of her depression was swept away at this moment, and she was full of energy and felt extremely refreshed. Xiao Huanghalian could no longer keep his cool as he glanced at Mo Xiaochuan. Mo Xiaochuan could not read his thoughts. He looked calm and said indifferently, "Believe in young Master Yun." "It's not that I don't believe you," young Emperor Hao Lian said in a deep voice. "It's just that it's been so long. Could it be that he hasn't recovered his strength yet, and that's why he's in trouble on the 5th level?" Ding Ling was a little nervous when she heard what he said, but she still said calmly, "It doesn't matter even if he's eliminated. I know he's already done his best." Mo Xiaochuan frowned and shouted coldly, "Before the results are out, don't make any wild guesses. Don't forget who young Master Yun is." The two men trembled. At the thought of Yunxiao's identity, they immediately regained their confidence, but the tension in their hearts grew stronger and stronger, and even the hands of Helian Xiao Huang were covered in cold sweat. The crowd waited quietly for a moment, and a few more people were directly eliminated from the 6th level. There was one more person on the 7th floor. It was Tang Xian from the Four Extremes sect. When Tang Jia saw that Tang Xian had advanced to the 7th level, his eyes flashed with a cold haze, and he snorted heavily. Cui Bo smiled in surprise and said, "I heard that young Master Tang Xian solved the Heaven and Earth chess game and obtained the true inheritance of the King-level Master's formation. It seems that it is very likely. Otherwise, how could he have become a 7th-tier alchemist so quickly?" Luoying laughed, "It's his luck to get the true inheritance. But so what? I'm afraid he can't compare to the disciples you sent. I'll be satisfied if he can enter the top 7. However, I'm afraid that Li Yunxiao, the dark horse that everyone has high hopes for, will not be able to become a dark horse." Cui Bo glanced into the tower and saw that there were only 9 people left, while Yunxiao was still on the 5th floor. He smiled faintly and said, "If I'm not wrong, Li Yunxiao will be out in 10 breaths." Cui Bo's words made the hearts of the people of Tianyuan Trading Company sink to the bottom, and they felt a chill all over. Especially Mo Xiaochuan and Hao Wang, whose expressions were extremely unsightly. They seemed to be unable to accept Yunxiao's defeat. In their hearts, he was an invincible existence. Even though he had been reborn as a teenager, he was still that peerless master in their hearts. Mo Xiaochuan gritted his teeth. "Just watch quietly before the results are out. You'll only expose your ignorant intelligence if you talk too much," he said angrily. "Intelligence? I'm waiting to see how high your IQ is." Su Donha laughed out loud in an unrestrained manner. "I understand how you feel, but the truth is always hard to come by," Cui Bo sighed. Suddenly, a dry voice came, "Not necessarily." Although it was only 2 words, it was filled with extreme confidence, as if everything in the art tower was within his control. Everyone's eyes turned and fell on Xian Yutong. This second elder of Myriad Treasures store had not said a word since he entered the hall. They did not expect this to be the first thing he said. "Oh. Why is Elder Xian's tone so certain?" Cui Bo asked in confusion. He knew that Xian Yutong would not speak without thinking. Although he looked dull and quiet, he was usually very steady and would not speak without confidence. The people of Tianyuan Trading Company also felt strange and looked over. Xian Yutong was still expressionless. "I guessed." The crowd was floored, thinking that he had some brilliant idea. They all snorted disdainfully. Cui Bo, on the other hand, fell into deep thought. He knew that Xian Yutong would never shoot without a target. It was not impossible for Yunxiao to suddenly advance in the last few seconds, but the probability was too small. 5, 4, 3. He could not help but read it in a low voice. Based on his observation of time, Yunxiao only had 5 breaths at most. The entire central square quieted down as they listened to him count silently, waiting for the moment of elimination or a miracle in advancing. 1. Cui Bo's last cry rang out in the square, and it shook everyone's hearts, especially those who had bet on Yunxiao. All of them looked depressed and defeated. Su Donha's shrill laughter suddenly rang out, and it was particularly ear-piercing. "I knew this kid was going to be eliminated. There won't be any miracles." She was the only one laughing wildly in the square. All the members of Tianyuan Trading Company looked pale. Since the time is up, why is young Master Yun still on the 5th level? Mo Xiaochuan suddenly asked. What? Everyone was taken aback. They looked up and saw that Yun Xiao was indeed still sitting there, motionless. Humph. Su Donha snorted coldly. Maybe Cui Bo's calculation of time was just a little off. He'll be here soon. Everyone had the same thought. Those who had placed their bets immediately regained some hope and prayed, hurry up and level up, hurry up and level up, Uncle Li, I'm betting all my money on you. Cui Bo's expression turned ugly. Others might think that he had miscalculated the time, but he knew that it was impossible. An expert at his level definitely had an extremely good grasp of time. It was impossible for a deviation of a few breaths to appear. But, Yun Xiao was stunned. Did I really miscalculate? Cui Bo started to lose confidence and mumbled to himself, it's already been more than 10 breaths. Even if he was wrong, he wouldn't have made so many mistakes. This Chi. As time passed by, a few more participants came out, leaving only the 7 strongest chambers of commerce. Everyone had entered the 7th floor one after another, leaving only Tong Xiu of the Empyrean 1 pavilion in the 6th, while Yun Xiao was still in the 5th. What's going on? This brat has definitely exceeded it by more than 2 hours. Yes, even if Lord Chui's calculations were wrong, it's been 10 minutes. Why hasn't he come out yet? Could it be that there's a problem with the spell tower? That can't be right, so many people came out as soon as the time limit was up, there's no reason for him not to come out. Could it be that it's broken now? It's not impossible, but I can't be that lucky, right? Cui Bo stood there in a daze and muttered to himself, what's going on? Could it be broken? Su Donha couldn't help but shout, Tower Master Cui. This spell tower is damaged. How can we continue the competition? Is it fair to the disciples who were sent out because of the time limit? The crowd immediately began to stir. After all, the matter of the technique was far too important, and fairness had to be guaranteed. Cui Bo felt that the situation was extremely tricky. He could not stop the competition now. He suddenly looked at Xian Yutong with a strange expression and said, Elder Xian, this Li Yun Xiao. The spell tower is not broken, Xian Yutong said in a rare moment. Li Yun Xiao has the ability to keep it. He snorted coldly in his heart. If the martial sovereign vanquisher, Gu Feiyang, could not even defeat these juniors, it would be too embarrassing and he would laugh his head off. Although he did not know how Yun Xiao had done it, since he was Gu Feiyang, he would not lose. This was Xian Yutong's point of view. There was no other reason other than that this name represented everything. How could this Ying Luo be Ying Luo? Cui Bo was shocked. He said in disbelief, Elder Xian, do you know something? The rest of the people from the Chamber of Commerce were also in disbelief. The art tower had been a Taoist rite for alchemy for many years, but they had never heard of anyone who could overcome the 2-hour limit. They found it even more difficult to accept that the art tower had been damaged. How can it not be broken? Are you siding with Tianyuan Trading Company? Su Donha couldn't accept it anymore. It wasn't easy for her to be so happy, but it was all for nothing. She couldn't accept it. The people of Tianyuan Trading Company breathed a sigh of relief. No matter what the reason was, as long as Yun Xiao did not come out, they would not lose. But, they still could not completely put their hearts at ease. Young Emperor Hulian glared at Mo Xiaochuan and chuckled. You're really something. You're so confident. You didn't let us down. Mo Xiaochuan snorted coldly and said, when has he ever disappointed us? Who has so little confidence like you? You're even worse than a wax-faced elder of the Myriad Treasures store. Although he was lecturing Mo Xiaochuan, he was also breathing a heavy sigh of relief in his heart. Just now, he had thought that Yun Xiao would lose for sure, but he did not expect things to turn out like this. Su Donha, watch your mouth. Cui Bo shouted coldly. I can't stand you anymore. Do you have any evidence to prove that the pagoda is broken and that we are biased toward Yun Xiao? Su Donha said coldly, Cui Bo, I'm not afraid of you as long as it's not against the ironclad rules of the Merchant Union. It's been more than an hour and you're still not out yet. What's your explanation? Just as she finished speaking, a cry of surprise came from the crowd. It's out, look. Su Donha was overjoyed and thought to herself, I finally didn't escape this time. She hurriedly looked at the spell tower, and her happy expression suddenly turned uglier than an eggplant beaten by autumn frost. Her eyes were almost spewing fire as she roared, Why is it you? Why did you come out? It was Tong Xiu of the Empyrean One Pavilion who came out of the art tower. Tong Xiu was shocked by Su Donha's appearance, and he hurriedly explained, Here's the thing, Grand Elder. My soul power was damaged by Yunxiao's sneak attack, but even so, I did not give up fighting desperately. I was about to succeed in the 6th level, but I found that there was not enough time. It was exactly 2 hours, and I was teleported out. It was like heaven's death. He had a look of grief and indignation on his face, trying his best to show that he had fought bravely and resisted tenaciously despite his injuries. Su Donha's face was almost dripping with water as she said word by word, You're saying that you were teleported out because the time was up? Yup. Isn't this the end of me? Tong Xiu sighed innocently. Bang. Everyone only felt a blur in front of their eyes. Following that, they heard an explosion of elemental energy entering their bodies. Then, they saw Tong Xiu being sent flying far away like a kite with a broken string. Judging from the vibration just now, he was probably dead. Everyone broke out in cold sweat and thought, This isn't the death of the heavens, but the death of yourself. If she said that she was teleported out when the time was up, wouldn't that be a slap to Su Donha's face? Young Emperor Hulian endured his injuries and laughed. Old woman, you're slapping your own mouth now. Your disciple has proven with his actions that the spell tower is undamaged. It's an honor for him to die. Su Donha's expression was frighteningly ugly as she walked back to her seat. It was rare that she didn't refute young Emperor Hulian and just sat there gloomily without saying a word. Everyone from the Empyrean One Pavilion had cold sweat dripping down their faces. They were all worried that they would become innocent punching bags when they grew up. Tong Xiu was the #1 genius young alchemist in the sect, and his future was limitless. She could kill anyone she wanted, and if they offended her, she would kill them without even blinking. Cui Bo looked at her and said coldly, It seems that the tower is not damaged. It's Yunxiao's ability to stay here. Let's continue. Those who had bet on Yunxiao breathed a sigh of relief, but it was not a good idea to stay on the 5th floor all the time. The people of Tianyuan Trading Company were much more relieved. After this, they were even more confident that Yunxiao would win the championship. At that moment, in the tower, in Yunxiao's sea of consciousness, the symbols of the 4 elements on the disk array were all activated. In fact, it could have been activated long ago. However, he had been immersed in the power of elements and had benefited a lot, so he had been unwilling to come out. According to his plan, even if he failed because of the time limit, he would still have to completely comprehend the power of the 4 major elements. When he opened his eyes again, it was as if 4 elemental powers were flashing in his eyes, as deep as the sky.